Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the first inaugural broadcast of Cowboy State Politics on the Independence Network. From very high above all the puerile and vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Northern Command Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program, the very first Cowboy State Politics program on the Independence Network. So I want to begin this morning just talking about the network just a little bit, and then we'll get to the news. The question is, why did we undertake this giant endeavor? The answer is simple, because the mainstream media lies to you constantly, and it's almost about every single thing that they say. And if it's not an out-and-out lie, then it's so colored by mistruths that there's no way that you can possibly ever have any confidence in what they're saying. At our launch party, which we played a number of times yesterday, we recounted several different examples as to why you can't count on the media and why we had to do what we're doing, starting our own internet radio station. One perfect example is back in May, I brought you the story of how the University of Wyoming was putting on drag show trainings. I went to extraordinary personal expense to do it. I had undercover journalists. In fact, I had numerous undercover journalists spread from one side of the state to the other, just to record exactly what our colleges and universities were doing. It was a huge undertaking. In fact, I even made a trip down to Laramie. I had to go pick up all of the video that had been recorded, but I even set up an alibi, interviewed George McSorry from the University of Wyoming, just so I could say that I was there to do an interview, and then nobody would know that I was picking up the undercover video that had been recorded. But as it turned out, the university was most definitely putting on drag show trainings, and you were paying for it. Now, when the story broke, I didn't exactly know what to expect. I thought, maybe there was a chance that it being as big a story as it was, that maybe some in the Wyoming media would pick it up. But nobody did. Not a single news story about the university spending at least $1.6 million of their budget on drag show trainings, and they call it multicultural affairs, and that's really, honestly, that's just a bullcrap name because all of it is focused on gender. I bet you didn't know that we have a director of gender and sexuality at the University of Wyoming. Kind of hard to track down what that guy makes, but we've got one. Well, there wasn't a single story in the Wyoming media. And then, just a few days ago, perhaps a week ago, there was a story about how president of the University of Wyoming president, Ed Seidel, was hosting Riley Gaines and a drag show in the same month. Isn't he all about free speech? Heart. Yeah, they make a big deal out of that, but they couldn't bring themselves to write one single story about your tax dollars being used to train drag queens at the university. And honestly, my friends, you should go back and watch the video that I posted from that. It's on the Cowboy State Politics YouTube channel. It's absolutely shocking. The things that were said on stage. At one point, they said, F the kids. So what I'm getting at here is that they can print a story that says how fair the university is and how they're focused on education, but they can't even bring themselves to report on a big story about training drag queens at the university. It just shows you the hypocrisy of the Wyoming media, how they're not telling you the truth, and if they're not out and out lying to you, they're just completely ignoring important stories in the state of Wyoming. So that's just one example of why we started the Independence Network. Here's another one. During the last legislative session, newspapers went to great lengths to interview legislators that were, on the more liberal side of things, the Redcoats. One example in particular was the Sheridan Press. Nearly every single issue, they had an interview with my representative, Poisonberry Crago, and Dave Kinski. Every single issue. But do you know how many times they called any of the conservatives? I'll give you a minute. Think about it. Do, 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 do. Yep, you got it. 0. Not one single time did they call conservatives to get an interview, to get their take on what might be happening in Cheyenne. They'll talk to the redcoats all day long, but they can't bring themselves to talk to any of the conservatives. That's because newspapers are owned by a very small and very select group of people in the state of Wyoming. And, they just, they're lying to you by omitting just about everything. Another great example was brought to us by our pal Joey Carenti from Just Blame Joey. He told you about a story about how the guy that's next to, who's vice chairman of the Wyoming Press Association, he's got some pretty interesting sexual charges against him. In fact, he exposed himself in a public library, then went to work for a newspaper, and never reported on his charges. Yeah, I know. I mean, honestly, who wouldn't cover it up? But the real sinister crime is that the outfit he went to work for, Stevenson Newspapers, they own several papers in the state of Wyoming, and not a single one of them printed a story. And then, years later, our pal Joey has that story plopped in his lap, and he runs with it and brings you the real story of Woody, I affectionately refer to him as. So in any case, there's a lot of reasons why we started the Independence Network, and it's to boil it all down, it's for one simple reason: truth. To bring you the truth. Verified facts, verified by documents or by audio or however else we're able to do it. We're going to bring you the truth of what's happening in the state of Wyoming and the country. So I'm glad that you're with us, and I hope that we'll bring you a quality product. That's the whole goal here, is to bring you something that you're not getting right now. Well, first of all, that's truth. But secondly, brought to you in a way that's entertaining and makes you want to listen to the program. On with the news. From the Blaze, Steve Scalise gets the House Republican nomination for Speaker. Now, this is a story that we've been covering for a while. On Wednesday's program, I brought you an interview with United States Representative Harriet Hageman. She's been supporting Kevin McCarthy through this whole thing all the way since January, and she even voted for him this time around. But let me give you my personal take on it. It was time for Kevin McCarthy to go. In my mind, he made two giant errors that were directly opposed to deals that he had made to become Speaker. The first of those was the debt ceiling. I personally see absolutely no reason why we have to continually keep raising the debt ceiling. We just have to continue spending, and there's evidently no end in sight. So the very first mistake that Kevin McCarthy made was to make a deal on the debt ceiling and to increase it so that we can continue spending. The second big mistake that he made was on the continuing resolution. Now, I know during the interview we had with Representative Hageman, she said that shutting down the government is a big, big, terrible, terrible thing. My friends, if they had to shut down the government for a week or two, I think it's worth the savings, don't you? I see no reason why we can't just put a full stop on everything, get our house in order, and then go back and actually start a real budgeting policy or procedure. But according to Representative Hageman, that's a big deal, and we shouldn't do that. Well, anyway, Kevin McCarthy made a deal on that one. In fact, he worked with the Democrats to do it. So I think that Kevin McCarthy needed to go. That being said, I think the timing on it was absolutely terrible. You have, there's a lot of things going on in the world. There's the war in Israel that's happening right now. We've got millions of immigrants flooding across our southern border and our northern border, for that matter. Nobody ever really talks about that one, but it's absolutely the truth. We've got a lot of problems in our country. So the timing on getting rid of Kevin McCarthy was not all that great. In fact, it was kind of bad. But timing being what it was, we got rid of Kevin McCarthy. Now this article was Steve Scalise. And I quote, and again, this is from The Blaze, Republicans voted 113 to 99 Wednesday to nominate House Majority Leader Steve Scalise over Representative Jim Jordan for the Speaker of the House. 8 Republicans voted for other candidates, and 3 simply voted present. Axios reported that Scalise, 58, now needs to pick up 217 votes in a floor vote, in which several Republicans have indicated that they will continue voting for Jordan, whom former President Donald Trump endorsed Friday. Democrats are expected to rally behind Hakeem Jeffries. Now, remember what Representative Hageman said during our interview back in January. Now, I played that for you on the broadcast. I believe that was yesterday. That in that speaker vote, you had 3 options. You had Kevin McCarthy, you had Hakeem Jeffries, and then you may have had some sort of coalition speaker that the most liberal Republicans and the Democrats would work together to get him elected. All right, so whomever, Steve Scalise or whomever they pick, needs 217 votes. Now, remember the makeup of the House of Representatives. There are 212 Democrats and there are 221 Republicans, some of whom are going to vote for Jim Jordan. So what do you suppose the chances are that some of those liberal Republicans would side with the Democrats? Well, I would say the chances are actually pretty good. We all hope not, but I mean, given some of the votes that some of these redcoats in the House of Representatives have taken, I don't think that it's that big of a stretch. In fact, I think that it might be a likely outcome. The article continues, quote, Scalise, who survived being shot by a radical leftist in June of 2017, is now battling a literal cancer, announced his bid for speakership on October 4th, stating, quote, God already gave me another chance at life, and I believe that we were put here for a purpose. This next chapter won't be easy, but I know what it takes to fight, and I'm prepared for the battles that lie ahead. I humbly ask you for your support on this mission to be Speaker of the House. In my personal opinion, Steve Scalise is not all that different from Kevin McCarthy. They've worked together a lot during the past years, and I really haven't seen that big a difference between Steve Scalise and Kevin McCarthy. That being what it is, it would appear that the House Republicans have decided that they want Steve Scalise to be the next Speaker of the House. Okay. So following the vote, Scalise told reporters, first, I want to thank my House Republican colleagues for just designating me as the Speaker. Obviously, we still have some work to do. We're going to have to go upstairs on the House floor and resolve this and then get the House open again. All right. So here's what you should expect out of this whole mess. It's going to take a lot of votes to get 217 Republicans to agree on Steve Scalise. The last time with Kevin McCarthy, it took over 15 votes, which, by the way, is not unusual in American politics. There have been several speakers races that have taken numerous votes. In fact, I think there was one in like 1920 where it took over 90 different votes to elect a Speaker of the House. So this is going to be a long process. And remember what Representative Hageman said during the interview. The difference between Republicans and Democrats, there's a lot of them, by the way, is that we're independent thinkers and that we care about freedom and liberty. And that causes us to kind of behave like a herd of cats. Everybody's got their own way that they think is going to be best, and so that they kind of move like that. Democrats, they don't act that way. In fact, they kind of vote in lockstep. Whatever Hakeem Jeffries tells them to vote on, they vote on. And I mean, it's honestly the biggest example of groupthink that you could possibly ever come up with. So, this whole House race, there's a lot to see coming up, and I'm sure all of us probably don't want to have a front row seat to it. Now, I know that you're going to find this one hard to believe, but Hamas is now calling for a global day of jihad on Friday the 13th. They're so big on dates. 9/11, Friday the 13th. What could they possibly be planning? Oh, and by the way, there was millions of people that came across our southern border. I wonder how many of those were on the terror watch list. I would say a lot of them. But from Breitbart, and I quote, the Palestinian Hamas terror group, known as Hamas, little repetitive there, has called for Muslims worldwide to stage a, quote, day of jihad, or holy war, on Friday, October 13th. Coincidentally, a date that resonates with horror movies and the upcoming Halloween holiday. Hamas referred to the day as Al-Aqsa Flood Friday, referring to the name of the operation in which it murdered 1,200 Israelis, wounded nearly 3,000, and kidnapped over 100. By the way, there were several Americans in those numbers. The Middle East Media Research Institute reported Hamas as saying, "We declare next Friday, the Friday of Al-Aqsa Flood, as a day of general mobilization in our Arab and the Islamic world and among the free people of the world. It is a day to rally support, offer aid, and participate actively. It's a day to expose the crimes of the occupation, isolate it, and foil all its aggressive schemes. It's a day to demonstrate our love for Palestine, Jerusalem, and Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa is it's the mosque that's right by the Western Wall. It's a day of sacrifice, heroism, and dedication, and to earn the honor of defending the first, I don't even know what that is, group of Muslims, the third holiest mosque, and the ascension of the trusted messenger." Yeah. You don't think that they had this planned, do you? I mean, you don't fire 4,400 missiles into Israel and then not have, like, step 2 in your plan already figured out. The United States should be on full alert, which means that you should be on full alert in your communities. Just because we live in a small state and we live in small communities, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be on our toes and have our eyes peeled and all of that. I love that phrase. So anyway, Global Day of Jihad. Ray Charles could have seen this one coming. Now, I mentioned all the illegal immigrants that are coming across our border. In fact, Joe Biden has taken what was, for all intents and purposes, a fairly secure border under President Trump, or at least we were on the way to doing that, and has completely destroyed any security we might have on our southern border and the northern border, by the way. I mentioned at the beginning of the program that the media doesn't report on a whole bunch of things because they don't want you paying attention to it. But the northern border is just as problematic as our southern border. It just so happens that, the southern border is where President Trump started building the wall and that most people focus on. But like I said, the northern border, it's also something that we should pay attention to. Let's see here. From Breitbart. An article entitled "Biden Welcomed 4 Million Illegal Migrants, it says, within 26 months. 4 million in 26 months. And I quote, "President Joe Biden's deputies allowed roughly 4 million illegal migrants into American communities during the first 26 months in office, according to a congressional report by Republican legislators. Officials released at least 2,148,738 illegal aliens into the United States." Now, just think about that one sentence. Officials released. That means they had them in custody and let them go. 2,148,738 illegal aliens in the United States from January 2021 to March of 2023, says a statement by House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan and Immigration Subcommittee Chairman Tom McClintock. That release of 2.1 million migrants at the border was accompanied by an additional 205,473 aliens who were released into the country through illegal categorical parole programs, the statement added. Meanwhile, more than 1.7 million known gotaways have evaded Border Patrol and escaped into the interior of the country since January 20th of 2021, with untold numbers of unknown gotaways avoiding detection during that period. So if you were doing the math in your head, that's a heck of a lot of people. And it's far more than our legal immigration system allows into the country on any given year. And, if you were to talk to any person that has moved to the United States from another country, every single one of them that I've talked to has been completely opposed to this administration's policies on immigration, as they should be. Because being an American citizen, is it one of the greatest privileges that you can attain in the world. There's a reason why we're called citizens, my friends. This goes back to before the Revolutionary War and before the writing of the Declaration of Independence. Before that time, we were just peasants. We were peasants of the King of England, subjects to the king's will and his bidding and whatever else that you want to call it. The word citizen, it's a title. It means that you're elevated above the level of a peasant or a subject, that you have rights and responsibilities. And if you read the Constitution, before the 14th Amendment, the word citizen is always capitalized. After the 14th Amendment, it's not capitalized anymore. Do you know why? Well, it's because everything before the 14th Amendment relates to your rights and your responsibilities. After the 14th Amendment, it relates to everything the government is going to do or is not going to do. So the word citizen has special meaning in the heart of every American citizen. And frankly, it has special meaning to every single person that is going through our immigration process. I've got this is one of my prized possessions, but I have my grandfather's immigration documents, and among them is a practice test he took to become a citizen. It's very fragile, and I don't get it out very often because I'm worried that I'm going to damage it. But I'm not certain that I could pass the test. And like I said, it's very fragile, so I haven't seen each page of it. But it takes study to pass our immigration test. Think about the interview I did with Peter Videnka. It was a couple weeks ago. If you're interested in reviewing it, it's a fascinating interview. But I think it's called "Escape from Communism, Volume 3." But in it, Peter Videnka talks about how his entire family studied together in order to pass the citizenship test. And to hear that guy talk about what being a citizen means to him is truly inspiring. And if you haven't listened to that episode, you need to go back to the Cowboy State Politics podcast on Podbean and listen to it. I mean, it really is an inspiring story. And so when you compare that to the millions of people that the Biden administration has voluntarily let cross our southern border, it's absolutely heartbreaking. It's an insult to everything that being an American is. It's an insult to every single citizen. And if you don't understand what the word citizen means, you should really go look it up. I mean, I know that a lot of people don't know how to use a dictionary, much less have picked one up in the last 10 years. But you really should go look up the word citizen. It's very different than the definition you get from subject or peasant or anything else. Citizens have rights and responsibilities and duties. And there's a big difference between just allowing someone to walk across the border and then making them a citizen. One of my favorite days in the Wyoming legislature is when they hold the citizenship or the naturalization ceremony in the Wyoming Capitol. And then after the ceremony, everybody who participated in it tours the Capitol, and they come into the House of Representatives and they come into the Senate. And every single one of them is holding a little flag. And it's just one of the little pin flags that you and I might use at a parade. They don't really mean that much to us. I mean, they should, because it's our American flag. But to watch each of those people who just became American citizens hold it is an awe-inspiring moment. I mean, if you just sit there and wonder what's going through their heads. The last group that I saw was the proudest group of people I've seen in a very long time. So becoming a citizen, it's a very important thing, and what the Biden administration is doing on both of our borders is a disgrace to all of it, and it's a disgrace to every American citizen. Now, here's a little bit of monumental irony for you. Senator John Fetterman says that America is not sending their best and brightest to Washington, D.C. And I quote, Senator John Fetterman on Wednesday decried the standard of Republicans who surround him in the Congress, lamenting America is not sending their best and brightest, to Washington, D.C. Fetterman made the despairing revelation during an interview with Stephen Colbert after being complimented on his excellent meme game during the broadcast The Late Show. Colbert asked Fetterman if it was awkward seeing people he's put a devastating meme out about around the Capitol. Quote, you all should need to know that America is not sending their best and brightest to Washington, D.C., replied Fetterman. Sometimes you literally just can't believe these people are making the decisions that are determining the government here. It's actually scary, too, he continued, pointing at how the federal government came this close to shutting down. You have some very less gifted kinds of people that are willing to shut down the government just to score points on Fox, he added. Oh, my Lord. Now, my friends, this is the guy that they had to pass the dress code about, that likes to run around the Senate chamber in his shorts and hoodie around the United States Capitol. He can't even put two sentences together and has to have a teleprompter at his desk. And he's saying that some Republicans are not as gifted as he would like to see in the United States Congress. I mean, the irony here is just rolling off the walls, my friends. Back to the article. Fetterman's lack of irony in delivering his scathing assessment of Republicans conveniently ignored his own stumbles in everything from his personal dress to his inability to answer even the most basic questions required of his job. It also sparked a response from others on social media. America is not sending their best and brightest, to Washington, D.C. Pot, meet, kettle. Another one from the mailbag. Fetterman. America is not sending their best and brightest to, Washington, D.C. Dude, they're laughing at you, not with you. Critics had good reason to challenge Fetterman's lack of self-awareness. Last month, Fetterman, who enjoys gym shorts and hoodies over the formal business attire traditionally required in the chamber, applauded the possibility of being able to don to his chosen casual attire in the workplace. This guy, man, that the citizens of Pennsylvania actually elected him. I mean, knowing or not knowing exactly who he is, I mean, he wasn't a great candidate from the very beginning, and yet they still elected him. It doesn't say a whole heck of a lot for the people that voted in Pennsylvania or the people that didn't vote in Pennsylvania. After the break, we're going to talk about some Wyoming environmental news. There's a number of things going on. Everything from antelope to land grabs to a lying politician. And we'll get to all of that after the break. I shouldn't have to remind you about any of this, but hunting season is here, my friends, and it's time for you to start gearing up for it. I know, that's going to make the wife extraordinarily happy, but it has to be done. One of the best things that you can put in your hunting pack is a pair of really warm socks. And the best socks that I have ever worn are made by the Buffalo Wool Company. Most of the time, the first thing to get cold on my body are my feet. And being a diabetic like I am, I'm really, really sensitive to it. Now, I've tried Pendleton wool socks and just about every kind of wool sock that you could possibly imagine, and nothing compares to these Buffalo Wool Company socks. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you are not going to be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. I talk about it all the time on this program. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. There's beautiful mountain vistas all the way from Sheridan to Saratoga and from Hewlett all the way to Jackson. It's an amazing place, and there's a ton of people that are moving here. If you're buying or selling, you need a real estate agent with experience. The best person to talk to is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. Last year, she sold $25 million worth of property all across the state of Wyoming, from small residential properties all the way up to giant ranches. She's lived in Jackson for 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. So it doesn't matter what type of property you're looking for or if you're thinking about selling. Give Rebecca a call, 307-699-3519. That's Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Northern Command Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Documented to be almost always right, 98.82%. 2% of the time. Actually, the truth of the matter is, my friends, that number is probably a lot higher. I haven't had the time to run the numbers recently, but each and every episode that we bring you the truth, that number goes up. And, well, the truth is that number goes up until I make a mistake, which is hardly ever. In fact, in the history of Cowboy state politics, there have only been 7 retractions that I've had to make, and I think that we're up to like 720 some episodes, 520 episodes, 530, something like that. So my point being, my friends, it's an incredible record, one that the Wyoming media can only aspire to, not that they ever would. From the Pravda on the Platte. Whoop, not that one.
Whoa. I think you gotta stop looking what you're doing here. I speak against you. That reminds me of that fairy tale, Cinderella.
Whoa, I don't know what that was, but it's live radio. Actually, what I was looking for was the Pravda on the Platte music. And evidently, I don't have it in my little soundbite thing here. Sorry for the interruption. Well, anyway, from the Pravda on the Platte. An article entitled Doing Things As Is. Controversial lease in Path of the Pronghorn. All right, hold on. I got to start all over on that. It is hilarious doing live radio, my friends, because there's no way that you can go back and fix it. You just have to roll with it, which is what we do here on Cowboy State Politics. Whatever happens, we just keep going. Anyway, the article, Doing Things As They Are. Now, before I get into it, we have to talk a couple of definitions. You hear the word conservation all of the time, and there's a lot of liberal groups that are trying to convince you that conservation means preservation. There's a difference. Conservation means using the resources that you have responsibly, that you conserve them. You still use them. You don't use all of them, but you take care of what you have. Preservation is something that's entirely different. What that means is that you leave it as it is and you don't touch it. In Wyoming, we have a lot of different areas that we've decided we are going to preserve. Normally, we call them wilderness areas. Now, in the Bighorn Mountains, if you go up out of Buffalo, or Sheridan for that matter, Sheridan, it takes you a little bit longer to get there, but if you go up out of Buffalo and you take Hunter Corrals, it's not that far of a walk, and then you'll come to what's called the wilderness boundary. And after that point, you can't have any motorized travel. So no motorcycles, no four-wheelers, no cars. You couldn't get a car up there if you wanted to. But it's to be left completely pristine. Now, you can still use it. You can still go fishing. And perhaps that's the difference here. We call that preservation, but what liberal activists are calling for is not even that. They want entire swaths of Wyoming, and I've got another article we're going to get to talking about the BLM here in just a second, but they want entire swaths of the state of Wyoming completely closed off to all human contact. None whatsoever. They just want to leave it in its natural beauty, even though in its natural beauty it causes things like wildfires that endanger human life. But, the folks at the BLM and these quote-unquote conservation activists, they don't give two craps about you and me, which is why they're pushing so hard from this. So, from the article, and I quote, "The fluid mineral industry's immense influence in Wyoming was on full display October 5th as the state's top 5 elected officials finalized a controversial gas lease in the pinch point of the world-famous Pronghorn Migration Path without the wildlife protections requested by 2 state agencies. First of all, the Pronghorn Path is a fiction. That just happens to be the easiest route that animals take to move around. It's not some historical path. It's not something that they tell their pronghorn buddies, hey, we got to take this path. It's historical. It's got all these little turnouts when it says, point of interest. That's not what animals do. Animals adapt to their environment that is around them. And they're actually kind of smart. They're not going to take the really hard path over the mountain when they can take an easier one. That just makes sense. But these environmental activists, tree-hugging commie wacko pinkos, they think that just because there's a trail there, that it's a historical path that we have to conserve. Back to the article. Quote, at issue was parcel 194, a 640-acre tract of state school trust lands that the Office of State Lands and Investments auctioned to Kirkwood Oil and Gas for $19 an acre. In July, conservation groups and the Wyoming Game and Fish Department had stalled the lease's completion after the July auction, citing concerns that the lease spanned a bottleneck in the famed Path of the Pronghorn. Total fiction. Where thousands of animals cross the New Fork River each year during their fall and spring migrations. On October 5th, the State Board of Land Commissioners, grappling with what to do with the lease, I'll tell you what they're going to do, follow the law. Anyway, they heard requests to tack on a new stipulation, which would prohibit drilling activity during flexible migration periods in the spring and the fall. Quote, in consultation with Game and Fish, we came up with a draft stipulation, Office of State Lands Director Jennifer Scoggin told the governing board. The idea was to address the need for the lessee to coordinate with the Wyoming Game and Fish to ensure surface disturbance did not occur during critical migration periods. All right, antelope are not migratory birds. They're not like Canada geese, nor hummingbirds, nor any other migratory bird. They're ungulates that move around all year long. Migration means that they go elsewhere. Now, I suppose you could make an argument that if you were coming from Buffalo to, say, Billings, that you were migrating. But that's not what the definition of migration is. Words mean things. And the trouble with liberal commie pinko tree-hugging wackos is that they try to change the meaning of words to fit their agenda. That's what they always do, and that's what they're doing here. Angie Bruce, Deputy Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish, emphasized the ecological importance of Parcel 194, explaining it's relied on by animals headed south in search of less snowy landscapes. So let me ask you something. So if you were to, say, put up a drilling rig and drill for an oil well, would that impede an antelope from, going through there? Do you suppose if you put up a fence, they wouldn't jump over it or under it or go through it? If you didn't know, antelope like to go through things sometimes, not necessarily over them or under them. But do you think that would impede their progress? No, it doesn't. Years ago, and of course this is just anecdotal evidence, but I had a lot of it. So years ago, I did a lot of permitting work with the BLM, and it was all for oil and gas development. And I'd kept a photo album. Every time I would see any type of animal, I mean, not like a sparrow or a prairie dog. Well, actually, I did have pictures of prairie dogs, but namely sage grouse, antelope, deer. When I saw them on a well pad, I would take a picture of them. When I saw a sage grouse sitting on top of a wellhead, I would take a picture. When I saw a buck deer munching on the very, very green grass on the well pad, I would take a picture. The truth of the matter, my friends, is that the oil and gas industry and coal industry and, honestly, any resource industry, were far better at reclaiming land than these conservation wackos would lead you to believe. There's areas outside of Gillette. In fact, there's a great one, and I love using this one as an example. But on one side of the highway, there's land that has not been touched for coal mining yet. On the other side of the highway, there's land that has already been reclaimed. And the question you ask people when they go by, and there's a big tour that comes through the state. It's legislators that come through every year, and it's put on by the coal industry just to show them the reality of what they're doing. And the question is, which side of the highway has been mined before? And invariably, they choose the one that hasn't even been touched yet, because energy companies do such an incredible job at reclamation that you're not even going to know the difference. And so to assert that just because a piece of property is disturbed, that's going to completely disrupt the entire ecological system and cause global starvation is as fanatical as it sounds. It's just not true, and it doesn't bear any resemblance to science whatsoever. And so these wackos here that are trying to shut off oil and gas development because of the path of the pronghorn, it's just a fantasy, my friends. There is no path of the pronghorn. It just so happens to be the easiest way that these animals get to where they're going. Animals adapt. And if you talk to any honest wildlife biologist, they will tell you exactly the same thing, that animals adapt to the circumstances surrounding them, just like humans do. The only difference with humans is sometimes we're not as smart as animals and we don't adapt and we end up screwing up our entire lives. But the point here is that the excuse me, the Office of State Lands actually made the right decision here, and they granted the lease, as they absolutely should have, because that's what the law says. Moving on to another case that liberal wackos have been all over for the last couple years: corner crossing. Now, this one's kind of a sticky one because there's genuine arguments on both sides. Before I get into this, let me give you the proviso that, I don't agree with corner crossing. I never have. I think that it's trespassing. I happen to be a landowner, or my family is, and I mean, honestly, we're of the opinion that ammunition's expensive, so we don't fire warning shots. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but I mean, literally, it's your property, and you have the right to do with it whatever you please. And if you don't want other people on there, then the government can't force them to, but they're trying to. So this corner crossing thing, and if you're unaware, here's just kind of the brief synopsis of it. Imagine you have property that kind of looks like a checkerboard. In fact, our public lands and private lands really do look like checkerboards. There's a section of private land, there's a section of public land, section of private, section of public, and it ends up looking like this giant checkerboard. And the corner crossing theory is that you can step across the corner of two sections of public land and not touch the private land. Well, there's an argument that, well, you are passing through the airspace of that particular piece of property. Okay. I mean, I don't think that that's a very compelling argument, but it's one that's been made in court. But here's the thing. You and I do not possess the technology to tell us exactly where we're at on the face of the globe. We don't have a land-based survey-grade GPS system. The one in your phone is probably only accurate between 20 and 100 feet. I know your phone says that it's way more accurate than it is, but that's just not true. I spent a lot of time surveying and when I was doing permitting through the BLM, and I can tell you for a fact that if you don't have a survey-grade GPS, there's no way of knowing where you're at. So it's virtually impossible for you to jump from corner to corner without crossing public land or without crossing private land. Here's the other sticky wicket in it. Even if it were possible, which it's not, but even if it were, pretty soon you would have ladders erected over that corner of the fence. The ladder would turn into a gate. Maybe just a small gate, maybe one of those cool little things you walk through and you can get through to public land. And then that would turn into a bigger gate, and then there would be a road. And if you've ever driven in the mountain, start one road, and then that one gets a little bumpy because all the dirt gets moved around. And then you move over, and then you make a new road, and then a new road, and then a new road. And so what starts out as a 10-foot path ends up being a 100-foot wide swath of private land that you've disturbed just so you can go to the next piece of public land. You're disturbing private property, and you're infringing on the personal property rights of the landowner. So what I'm getting at, my friends, is that this whole corner crossing thing is far more complicated than just passing one law or another one. It's far more complicated than one court case or another one. In fact, I think it's going to take an entire overhaul of how we look at public and private land, which I don't know if you spend any time in the Wyoming legislature, but that's a topic that will get just about everybody in the room fired up. It's far more complicated than any newspaper makes it out to be. So let's go back to the Pravda on the Platte. And in an article entitled "Corner Crossed Landowner Hires High-Powered Appeal Attorneys," and I quote, "The Carbon County landowner who lost a civil suit alleging 4 hunters trespassed by crossing through the airspace above his ranch has hired 3 appeal attorneys, including one who clerked for Supreme Court Justices Samuel Alito and Brett Kavanaugh. The 3 lawyers filed papers in the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit to represent Elk Mountain Ranch owner Fred Eshelman's Iron Bar Holdings Company. Chief Judge Scott Skevdahl, I always have trouble pronouncing that guy's name, of the United States District Court for Wyoming, ruled that Eshelman, who had sued 4 Missouri men who corner-crossed to hunt public land, enmeshed in his 22,045-acre ranch. Eshelman appealed the judgment to the 10th Circuit in Denver. The move suggests that Eshelman is serious in pursuing the case through the highest levels of the legal system. All the attorneys work for Arnold and Porter, Kai and Scholler, which has offices in Denver, Washington, D.C., and other cities. The company earned recognition as one of the country's top firms dealing with appeals. And my personal opinion, my friends, is that this is going to have to go all the way to the United States Supreme Court. There's no possible way around it. It is going to be one of those issues where a judge rules one way and then another judge rules the opposite, simply because there are 2 absolutely legitimate ways of looking at this entire argument. And to say that you're on one side or the other, I think that discounts the complexity of the entire issue. Now, if you talk to any local rancher, they'll tell you absolutely that that's trespassing. But like I said, there's arguments on both sides, and it's a far more complicated system than anybody leads you to believe. So definitely, this is one that the Wyoming legislature is going to have to take up, and there's no 2 ways around it. Now, my friends, the moment you've all been waiting for. That's right. Lying politicians on Cowboy state politics. In an article entitled A Rational Analysis of the BLM's Proposed Resource Management Plan, legislative liar Ken Chestek says the following, and I quote, you're going to love this guy by the time I'm done with him. Quote, the BLM's draft resource management plan for the Rock Springs field office will help the BLM manage 3.6 million acres of land in southwestern Wyoming. The plan helps BLM to fulfill its mission to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the public lands for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. Since many diverse interests wish to use BLM lands in potentially mutually inconsistent ways, balancing these competing interests is an extremely difficult task. No doubt, it's a task that lying politician Ken Chestek is more than up to. Now, why do I call him lying politician Ken Chestek? Well, it could be that I have audio of him doing that very thing. But first of all, let's look at his article. Now, here's the most important part of it. And by the way, this appeared in this morning's edition of the Pravda on the Platte, the Casper Star Tribune. And I quote, currently, 96.67% of all BM land in the area is potentially available for coal extraction. Under Alternative B, and by the way, the BLM plan has 3 or 4 alternatives in it. Alternative B is the one that pretty much restricts all human use of this 3.6 million acres. And as our pal Joey Carenti has said over and over, really it's double that because of the checkerboard pattern that I mentioned in the previous segment, that our public and private land is checkerboarded, and in lots of cases, you'll have a piece of private land that's way out in the middle of public land. And if the BLM were to shut off all public access to public lands, well, then that landowner would be landlocked, and it would be nearly impossible for him to use his private property or for anybody to get there for that matter. So anyway, the current Alternative B, and you're going to love this, remember that right now, 96.67% of BLM land is available for coal leasing. I'm not saying that all of that is extractable. I'm not saying they can access all of it, but 96.67% is available for it. Alternative B reduces that to 6.21%. Now, I'm not doing the math on it. That's almost entirely a 100% reduction. Honestly, I know. Okay, so we're not doing the math on it, but just looking at the raw numbers. So to Ken Chestek, let's see what he says here. While that reduction appears at first glance to be dramatic, there is little evidence that there is any coal to be recovered there anyway. The plan notes that here are no outstanding or pending applications for federal coal leases or exploration licenses on lands within the planning area. If you believe that, I've got some beachfront property down around Guernsey to sell you. But he goes on. land availability for other resource extractions goes way down significantly, but not as much as coal. Land for trona extraction. By the way, trona is a huge industry in Wyoming, if you're not aware of what it is. Trona ends up in a lot of different products, from glass to soap to, lots and lots of things. So trona extraction, for example, still quoting from the article, would be reduced by about half, 98.4% of available land to 45.6%. Hope you're doing the numbers in your head. Land available for oil and gas production would go down from 85.4% available to 39.5%. Even land available for wind and solar energy installations would be reduced by more than half, from 68.4% to 27.5%. Well, now that doesn't sound too bad. Actually, it sounds revolting. Anyway, but listen to how he ends this thing. Debating the relative merits of resource extraction versus resource conservation on public lands is a debate worth having, but let's have that debate based on provable facts. I'm totally in favor of that, my friends. Let's talk about things that I can prove about Ken Chestek, not on hyperbolic accusations or misrepresentations. There's somebody else that does some hyperbolic misrepresentations and says a lot of things about people that aren't true. So here's why I call Ken Chestek lying redcoat Ken Chestek. Well, he is the head of a group called Wyoming Promise. Now, I went through this whole group in 2 great episodes on the podcast. One of them is called Wyoming Promise, or Is It? And the other one is called Liz's Long List. And that one talks about all of Liz Cheney's fundraising. But Wyoming Promise plays a significant role in that. Now, ostensibly, this group wants to just decrease the influence of dark money in our elections, and they're opposed to this whole Citizens United thing. Now, Citizens United was a Supreme Court case that really opened the door for campaign financing by corporations and large political action committees. The Supreme Court ruled that money is speech, and that you can, if you donate to a political campaign, that's equivalent to you expressing yourself. It absolutely is. And to argue that corporations don't have a stake in politics, that's just absurd on face. Well, anyway, Ken Chestek started this little group called Wyoming Promise. In fact, here's Ken Chestek talking about it.
Tell us, what is Wyoming Promise, Ken? And let me begin with you.
Wyoming Promise is a grassroots organization of Wyoming citizens who have seen that we have serious problems with money in politics, that we need to solve that problem first. So we are working to get a measure.
Wyoming Promise. It's completely grassroots and totally Wyoming-centric. Again, reference that whole beachfront property down in Guernsey I was telling you about. First of all, Wyoming Promise, if you go to their website, their logo is so cool. It's a W that has a bunch of red and blue lines, kind of like, Republicans and Democrats coming together. But it's completely grassroots, and it's totally started by Wyoming citizens. In fact, on their website, even though Ken Chestek says that, they're linked to a nationwide group called American Promise. Interestingly enough, American Promise's logo is an A with red and blue lines. And if you go look at the two of them side by side, they're the exact same thing. Ken Chestek funds his group, Wyoming Promise, through a network of left-wing fundraising efforts. Chief among them is, are you ready for it? Drum roll, please. Act Blue. Act Blue is the Democrats' fundraising arm that collects individual donations from private citizens. Basically, it's a giant credit card processing center. Well, back in March of 2022, I did that episode I told you about, Wyoming Promise, or Is It? And I went through the entire thing about Wyoming Promise and exactly where they get their money. Here's a soundbite from that episode. Now, it's kind of long, but it's really important when you're talking about Ken Chestek, when he's saying that he's the arbiter of truth and he's the one that's telling you the truth. All right, here we go. Our story begins with an episode we did back on March 19th, entitled Wyoming Promise, or Is It? Now, in that episode, I told you about a group called Wyoming Promise that claims that they're totally grassroots and they're totally funded by Wyoming citizens, and all they want to do is get a handle on all of this dark money that's being spent in political campaigns. Here's the head of Wyoming Promise, Ken Chestak, telling us exactly what this group is about. Now, I found this piece of audio after I did the episode about Wyoming Promise. This is from 4 years ago, where he did an interview with Wyoming Public Radio. Now, hold on just a second. This is the same piece of audio that I just played for you from Ken Chestak, but you've got to listen to the whole thing to make it all make sense. Let's continue.
Wyoming Promise is a grassroots organization of Wyoming citizens who have seen that we have serious problems with money in politics, that we need to solve that problem first. So we are working to get a measure on the Wyoming ballot that would basically say we call for a constitutional amendment to allow for meaningful campaign finance reform.
Now, doesn't that just sound great? I mean, who doesn't want to get a handle on all this campaign finance stuff? Well, Ken Chestak doesn't, and they're totally grassroots. In the interview, they're all wearing these little buttons with the Wyoming Promise logo on it. It's a W with some red and blue lines, and actually, it looks exactly the same as the American Promise logo, only that's an A and not a W. Totally original and completely grassroots. Now, here's what I told you back in that March 19th episode about these guys. You remember how their website says that they're a grassroots organization and that they're totally Wyoming-based and they're completely nonpartisan? Don't forget that part. Oh, yeah, but there was that little bit about them being linked to a national group called American Promise. And here, in their own words, is who the sponsors of American Promise are. I took this next little soundbite off of a video that they put out. Here it is.
We'd like to thank our sponsors, the Brennan Center for Social Justice, Public Citizen, and People for the American Way.
People for the American Way. Now, there's another flowery-sounding group. So just so we're tracking here, Wyoming Promise is linked to other progressive groups in the state of Wyoming that are funded through a very small number of people who have ties to larger progressive groups, and namely George Soros. But they're also linked to a national group called American Promise, who is funded by People for the American Way. According to Influence Watch, which is that great website that I tell you about all the time where you can track the money sources from all of these different groups, they characterize People for the American Way as the following, quote, People for the American Way is a left-of-center advocacy group formed in 1981 by liberal Hollywood television producer Norman Lear to oppose the conservative principles espoused by Christian conservative televangelists. People for the American Way monitors what it characterizes as, air quotes here, right-wing activities, advocates for left-of-center policy agendas, and helps to elect liberal political candidates. People for the American Way's policies include left-of-center positions on a wide range of issues, including public funding of abortion providers, a path to citizenship for illegal immigrants, tax and spend big government budgeting, and a general opposition to President Donald Trump's policies and appointments. And guess who's on the advisory board for American Promise? Former Wyoming Senator Alan Simpson. Oh, just love him. And he's really concerned about dark money, even though he sits on the board of a group that's funded by dark money. But, pay no attention to that. Here's what he had to say about all of this political fundraising.
Has the Citizens United versus FEC ruling already impacted political campaigns in Wyoming, local, county, state, federal, and can you give it?
Oh, yes, I believe they have. And they pick some very glorious-sounding names. Used to, have the Constitution or liberty or justice or freedom or America or whatever or equality, whatever. And they're not bad people. They're not, but they're getting injections of money that you and I don't know where it comes from. It's there, and it's real. And they use good names, and they go to the hearings, and they hire good people. They hire people who are smooth and sharp and hang around the legislature and take you to dinner, and nothing new about that, but you don't know what phantom background they have and who is the money behind them, because there certainly isn't a guy giving $5 from Gillette.
Wow, sounds pretty serious. One question, Al. If it's so serious, then why do you sit on the board for American Promise, who is funded by People for the American Way, who is funded by the Tides Foundation, and of course, spooky dude himself, George Soros? I swear, all roads lead back to that guy. Now, and that is Ken Chestek. Sounds like a guy that you should just absolutely believe, doesn't it? I've got more for you after the break. We'll get back to the program in just a second, but first, some completely egregious self-aggrandizement. You can listen to the podcast on any of your favorite podcasting apps, iTunes, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest way is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. If your name is Sleepy Joe Biden and you're dumber than a box of rocks, well, you can go to cowboystatepolitics.com, pull up an article, and educate yourself, just like you should have been doing before you decided to run for office. New episodes of the program are published every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday morning. And don't forget about the Thursday live episode that begins every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. You know, the show you're listening to right now. You can find the link at cowboystatepolitics.com or on the Cowboy State Politics Facebook page. Have you been looking for a new place to advertise your business? Well, I'd suggest advertising on this program, Cowboy State Politics. It's Wyoming's most listened to podcast. Now, the difference between advertising on the radio and on a podcast is most people just have the radio playing in the background and they're not actively listening to your message. People who download a podcast are there to listen to the whole thing, so you can be sure that your message will be heard. I have a statewide platform, and no one is going to beat my advertising rates. Shoot me a message. The address is david@cowboystatepolitics.com. I would love to get that conversation started with you. And now, back to the program. David Iverson behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone, broadcasting to you from the Cowboy State Politics Northern Command studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. My friends, I have to tell you, I've been having a ball today. I've always wanted my own radio program, and wouldn't you know it, me and a couple pals got together and decided that we're just going to start our own radio station. Screw that whole just having a program business. Why not own the entire thing? And so we started the Independence Network. It's a network of liberty-minded individuals focused on one thing, truth and verified facts. Now, the other folks that are involved in this are my pals, Joey Correnti. He's got his podcast called Just Blame Joey, and his program, which airs exactly after mine does, of the same name, Just Blame Joey. He started out with a rock star of a story about the Wyoming Press Association. I'm telling you, this guy, nobody beats his research skills. Well, maybe except for me. Don't worry about it, Joey. We'll talk about that later. And then Representative Ken Pendergraft. And of course, he's got a unique perspective being in the legislature. He's another liberty-minded conservative. It's the three of us put together have just decided to do something different in Wyoming media. So that's why we've started the Independence Network. Now, it's going to be broadcast every day of the week, and we're going to have some content that's probably a little bit different than you're used to hearing on some of the other lame, vacuous, pedantic, puerile Wyoming media sources. There's going to be a lot of different shows. We haven't quite figured out the weekend yet, but we're going to have shows on the weekend. And the other thing that we're working on, and I think this is incredibly exciting, is that we're going to have a space for conservative-minded journalists to write. And I think that that's extraordinarily important because I've got a couple people working on a few stories about how media sources in the state of Wyoming shun conservative thinkers. In fact, in some cases, they just won't hire people if they find out that they're conservative. There's absolutely a liberal bias in Wyoming. And, during our launch party, Ken Pendergraft brought up an interesting point about that. And he used an article that he was asked to comment in by Wildfile. And it was about the Oath Keepers. And, it was honestly... that article ended up being the biggest pile of dog crap I think I've read in a really long time. But when he was asked to comment on it, he said no. And the reporter says, well, why not? And he goes, because you're Wildfile. Meaning, of course, that the article had already been written and they were going to say what they were going to say about him anyway, so there was no need for him to comment. Well, as it turns out, that article got printed in just about every single Wyoming paper. They repeat themselves. It's one giant echo chamber, and it's almost like they write articles just seeing who can out-liberal the next guy. And so we're working on it. It's going to be a while, but we're working on a space to where conservative-minded journalists can write and publish their work without fear of being fired or canceled or any of that other crap that the Wyoming media does. So before the break, we were talking about lying redcoat Ken Chestek and how he started this whole group, Wyoming Promise. Now, right now, Ken Chestek, he's a member of the State House of Representatives, and he claims to be a law professor. I'm sure that he is. I'm sure that that's his job. But of course, if he's a law professor, that means you have to listen to him, because why would he lie to you? Well, he lies to you all the time, and the biggest example of this is his group, Wyoming Promise. Now, there's one more piece of this thing, that Wyoming Promise has ties to this thing called the Bridge Alliance. Now, all of these liberal groups, there's this whole giant spider web of them. And for a while, I've been meaning to put this up on the wall of the studio and just have all the little red strings all over, tracing all the connections to all of these people. But my fear is, if I go too far, you're not going to be able to see the map behind it or all the articles that everything's pinned to, because there's so many of them. But the Bridge Alliance is another one of these left-wing funding houses. And what liberals do, is they start their own little nonprofit. And really, they're just funding warehouses. So essentially, really, really rich people give money to these funding warehouses, and then the funding warehouse divvies it up to candidates and causes. You see a lot of this with George Soros. All of his groups are, real sounding, flowery sounding American names. There's another one in Wyoming. Her name is Liz Storr. I call her the George Soros of the West. But all of her groups are all conservation sounding. Muley Fanatics and Trout Unlimited and all of those things. Yeah, those are both of those are Liz Storr endeavors. But she also funds Wildfile, which is interesting. And here we are talking about articles that are written by Wildfile that are completely nonpartisan and absolutely unbiased. So Ken Chestek's group, Wyoming Promise, and the Bridge Alliance have ties to another organization called Issue 1. Now, Issue 1, they focus on the same thing, allegedly, that Wyoming Promise does. They want to get big-time dark money out of politics, and they're pushing for a constitutional amendment to make that happen. So the two groups are aligned ideologically, but they're not connected directly through their websites. You have to go through the intermediary American Promise, which, of course, according to lying redcoat Ken Chestek, they have no connection to, because they're completely grassroots and completely Wyoming-based. So Issue 1, I'm sure you've probably never heard of them, unless, of course, you listen to Cowboy State Politics. It used to be headed by this guy named Nick Penniman. Now, you remember when Liz Cheney had her gig down in Jackson, and she was on stage, and they were talking about dark money, and it was right after she got kicked out of the Republican Party because she's not really a Republican. And actually, she wasn't kicked out of the party because we can't legally do that. But the state party voted not to recognize her as a Republican anymore. But she held this event down in Jackson. And for me, the most obscene part of it was that she charged her constituents to come listen to what she had to say. Well, she was on stage with this guy named Nick Penniman. And what kind of piqued my interest about the whole thing is that nobody in the Wyoming media asked, well, who the heck is Nick Penniman? And secondly, what is he doing on a stage with our congresswoman? Well, Nick Penniman has a very interesting history himself. Here's another soundbite about Mr. Penniman. 2 days after I finished the episode that I just got done telling you about, Liz Cheney had her gig in Jackson on March 22nd. She was speaking at an event with Nick Penniman. By the way, she charged her constituents $10 a pop to even get in the door and listen to what she had to say. Nick Penniman is the president and CEO of this group called Issue One. Not exactly a flowery-sounding name for an organization, but it was one that I hadn't heard of before. Nick Penniman is a progressive activist and former executive director and co-founder of the Huffington Post Investigative Fund, which he started with a grant from the Center for American Progress. Yeah, that same spooky dude George Soros group. There is scant information about Issue 1 on their website. That's because they don't want you to know what Issue 1 is. So Nick Penniman, he got his start with a grant from the Center for American Progress and started the Huffington Post investigative arm. Now, if you don't know what the Huffington Post is, you should go check out their website. They're the publishers of All Things Liberal. And, I mean, they'll post stories from Media Matters. They have no problem dealing with, printing libelous stuff. They always, and when they get called on it, they go back and say, well, we didn't get that one exactly correct, and all of that bull crap. But definitely a left-wing, quote-unquote, news source. Now, Nick Penniman was also integral in what is called the Democracy Alliance. The Democracy Alliance is another one of these left-wing funding clearinghouses, but this one is different. A lot of these left-wing funding houses, they have connections that are like 3 and 4 and 5 places removed, and so it's very difficult to figure out where the money actually comes from. They'll have a front that says the bulk of the money comes from the Tides Foundation, the Center for American Progress, all of this. But the reason why the Democracy Alliance is different is they have direct ties to George Soros. Absolutely they do. It's easy to look up. I've mentioned a couple times in these sound bites that there's this great website called Influence Watch. And if you go to it, you can type in just the name of just about any group, and there's an entry on them. And what the great thing about it is that it traces the money for you. So here you have lying redcoat Ken Chestek telling you that you should listen to him about this BLM bullcrap, and that he is the authority and he's the reasonable one, and you should listen to him and not the hyperbolic Republicans, when he himself runs a group with a completely shady history. And, I mean, the whole thing is absolutely documentable. In fact, if you look back, and probably what I'll do on cowboystatepolitics.com is I'll go back and refresh the links so you can look up all of this stuff about Nick Penniman and Ken Chestek and all of it. I mean, for me, it's absolutely fascinating. But there again, I like tracking down all these lying politicians. So anyway, it's a giant spider web, and you shouldn't listen to a darn thing that Ken Chestek has to say. I mean, he's absolutely disgraceful. And, I knew that he was going to get elected in the last election because there really wasn't that great of a candidate running against him in Laramie. And, he's one of those professors that's pretty well liked, so he's getting a lot of votes from the university. Probably a lot of illegitimate ones, though I don't have any proof on that one. But anyway, you should absolutely ignore everything that Ken Chestek has to say. Now, I've got the TV in the studio going, and it's just a minute ago. I mean, they've changed it now, but just a minute ago, there was a breaking story coming from Israel, and I want to talk to you about it. And I found the article that it was referring to, and it's entitled, ISIS Flag Found in Hamas Equipment as Netanyahu Makes Direct Connection Between the Terror Groups. Hamas is ISIS. Now, if you've been paying any attention to this, they absolutely are. During the interview with Harriet Hageman, I pointed out that there were groups marching in Washington or in New York City that were carrying Nazi flags, and there wasn't any ISIS flags spotted, but the connections to them are very, very similar. So, from the article, and I quote. Israeli soldiers said they found an ISIS flag among the belongings of a Hamas operative, drawing a connection between the two terrorist groups. ISIS, also known as ISIL or the Islamic State, is a terror group that rose to prominence in 2014 when it declared a caliphate in Iraq and Syria. It also claimed responsibility for deadly attacks in different parts of the Middle East, including Lebanon, Egypt, and Jordan. Hamas brought ISIS flags to massacre Israeli children, women, and men, the Israeli Defense Force, IDF, said in a post on X. With a photo of the flag. The IDF added, Hamas is a genocidal terrorist organization. Hamas is worse than ISIS. A connection between the two terror groups was also made during a news conference in Israel with United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu made a direct connection between the terror groups, saying Hamas is ISIS. Okay, they're repeating themselves now. Just as ISIS was crushed, so too will Hamas be crushed. And it should be treated exactly the same way as ISIS. They should be spit out of the community of nations. No leader should meet with them. No country should harbor them. And those that do should be sanctioned. I think that those that do harbor those radicals ought to be we ought to do a little bit more than just sanction them. So, I mean, that's an important piece of news coming out of Israel, and it draws the connections between Iran, ISIS, and all of them, and it brings it all together and shows you exactly who these people are, as if any of us really had any doubt. I mean, you know, the stories that I've seen coming out of Israel, frankly, I didn't know that people were capable of doing that to one another. I mean, everybody is born. I believe, I was brought up to believe that everybody is born with a conscience, and that's just inherent to being human. But when you see pictures and stories like this that are coming out of Israel, it's hard to imagine that these folks ever had a conscience. And you know, and another point, you know, I brought up yesterday on the program that the Gaza Strip is roughly the size of Washington, D.C. It's around 68 square miles. There were 4,400 rockets fired from Gaza into Israel, which means, if you do the math, that there were approximately 32 missiles fired for each square mile in that country into Israel. How in the devil are you supposed to figure out where those rockets came from? I mean, I know that we have technology and equipment that's probably capable of doing that, but honestly, I mean, how are you going to determine? I mean, a square mile is... I mean, that's a really small chunk of property, especially when you're looking at it from a fighter jet. So my opinion is, you know, wipe the whole place out, turn it into a parking lot. And, you know, and here's the other thing. I read a couple of articles yesterday. One of them was in the Pravda on the Platte that said, well, you know, there's a lot of innocent people in there. Okay, let's try to take an unbiased view of this. Actions have consequences, my friends. Everything we do has a consequence to it, and whether you make a good choice or a bad choice, you have to deal with those consequences. Israel is a free society, which means that anybody can choose to live there. And, you know, even if you're a Muslim, if you're a Christian, or, you know, you're a Buddhist or whatever, Israel's open, and you can live there. And so if you choose to live in the Gaza Strip, then that kind of makes you a little bit complicit, especially if you know that there are missiles being stored in hospitals and schools. You can't avoid responsibility for what was done to Israel. I was listening to the Sean Hannity radio program yesterday, and you know he had an interesting point that the attack on Israel, I mean, if you compare the populations and do the ratio, it would be equal to about 35,000 Americans being killed. This most definitely is Israel's 9/11. And if you're old enough to remember what it felt like on 9/11, I mean, we wanted to tear the throat out of anybody that had any involvement in it. And, you know, everybody was ready to go to war. And so try to put yourself in the position of Israel. 4,400 rockets were just fired into your tiny little country. What did they expect was going to be the result of that? You know, it's fascinating. On Monday, there were news reports that Hamas wants to talk truce. Well, no kidding. No, I wanted to use another word there, but I held myself back. No kidding, they wanted to. They just fired 4,400 rockets, and they're looking at the warplanes fueling up and the tanks getting ready to roll. Yeah, they want to talk truce. But, my friends, if you declare yourself independent, as the Palestinians did in 1988 at the United Nations, that means you want to be your own country. And when you launch missiles into another country. That's what's called an act of war. And war is a messy, messy business on both sides, my friends. And this time, it's, in my personal opinion, it's time for Israel to clean up the mess, and they absolutely should have. They absolutely should. And as the United States should absolutely be behind them. You know, after our 9/11, President Bush said, and somewhere I've got a soundbite of this, but President Bush said, you know, those people that knocked down our buildings, they're going to hear from all of us really soon. Well, those people that fired those rockets need to hear from all of us really soon. Chief in front of all of this thing is the Secretary of State's representative, Jake Sullivan. This article is hilarious. Jake Sullivan's foreign policy blunders resurface as after hyping up Middle East peace days before Hamas talks. Jake Sullivan has faced calls from Republicans to resign in recent years, and this is from Fox News also. Fox News' Lucas Tomlinson reports on the surprise Hamas attack on Israel after National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan claimed last week that the Middle East is at its quietest point in 20 years. Yeah, I'm sure 4,400 rockets were awfully quiet. I don't know what Jake Sullivan is thinking. Top advisor to President Biden is facing criticism over a comment he made shortly before the Hamas attacks in Israel. Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, said that the Middle East was the calmest it has been in decades, bringing to the forefront other controversial foreign policy decisions the Biden advisor has been involved in over the last decade. Quote, "What we said is want to depressurize, de-escalate, and ultimately integrate the Middle East region," Sullivan said at the Atlantic Conference on September 29th. Quote, "The war in Yemen is in its 19th month of truce. For now, the Iranian attacks against U.S. forces have stopped. Our presence in Iraq is stable. I emphasize for now because all of that can change and the Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades." Okay, first of all, Jake Sullivan is absolutely wrong on all of this, but it brings up another question. Where are our intelligence services? Where is the CIA? What have they been paying attention to that they didn't see this coming? You can't move over 4,000 rockets into an area no bigger than Washington, D.C. without getting noticed. That's impossible. So I ask you, my friends, where are all these intelligence experts? What the heck have they been doing? Because they certainly haven't been paying attention to the Middle East, and Jake Sullivan doesn't have a clue what's going on there. Listen to this one. 8 days later, Hamas launched an attack on Israel that killed at least 1,200 Israelis, causing many conservatives to blast Sullivan's comments on social media. Quote, "We're less safe with this Biden team," former Trump acting director of the United States National Intelligence Service, Richard Grenell, posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, in response to Sullivan's comment. Matthew Brodsky, senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy, wrote on that same platform that Sullivan's comment was an outright lie at the time he said it. Sullivan has been at the center of several controversies in recent years, many of which have been brought up by conservatives on social media in light of his Middle East comment, including the Biden administration's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. In the days following the Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan, Sullivan and the State Department were criticized for being unable to say exactly how many Americans had been left behind. My friends, that's because they didn't give 2 craps about how many Americans were left behind in our withdrawal from Afghanistan. Frankly, they didn't care who was going to be left behind. And you know, I remember very clearly one of the press photos they used was of that airplane taking off and people hanging off of it. How incredibly heartless can you possibly be? I mean, if you're the guy in the White House that says, hey, we're going to use that photo for all of our press releases. Oh, my God, my friends. We're dealing with an administration that, frankly, well, first of all, they don't have any idea what they're doing. And and if they do, that's an even scarier prospect, that they don't care. Now, also on yesterday's program, I brought up the point that the United States released $6 billion to Iran. And the response from the White House was, well, you know, they haven't spent $1 of that money yet. Really? Uh-huh. All right. Well, anybody who's ever had a job, who's ever gotten paid for anything, knows that money is fungible. Now, maybe we don't know what that term means when we're little and we have our job, but we know that when the paycheck comes on Friday and it's Wednesday, we can take whatever money we had devoted to other things and spend it on what we want. So in Iran's case, that means that they took the $6 billion that they had devoted to other things, roads. They don't really care about schools, but roads, medical supplies, those sorts of things. And they spent it on funding the Hamas terror group. Now, just yesterday, I heard the Biden administration saying, well, we can't definitively say that Iran was paying for all of this. They came out and said it. Oh, my God, my friends. How completely stupid do they think we all are? I mean, honestly, think about the things that have come out from the White House press briefing room. I mean, most of them are stupid anyway because you have Karine Jean-Pierre in there. But just think about, about all of the press releases that have come out. That, think about Biden's granddaughter that he didn't acknowledge for, God, I don't know, years. And Karine Jean-Pierre stood up there and well, the president, he loves his granddaughter. Really? He said in a speech where he mentioned all of them by name and conveniently left one out. So there's a lot of bullcrap that comes from the Biden administration, and the only possible explanation for all of it is they think we're absolutely stupid. Jake Sullivan thinks we're stupid. Joe Biden, he doesn't know what planet he's on, so, I guess we could put some blame there. He is the guy in charge, but really it's all the people around him. They think we're stupid, and they're going to treat us that way. Moving on. From Squires Magazine. Now, that's an outlet I don't read very often, but this article kind of struck me, entitled, Progressive Policies That Treat Criminals Like Society's Victims Cost Lives. Now, just the title of it is proof of everything that you need. Absolutely they do. When you treat people like victims, on the other end, you ignore people who really are victims. From the article, and I quote, the late journalist Andrew Breitbart coined the phrase, politics is downstream from culture. The Breitbart doctrine reminds conservatives that changes to our political system must be preceded by changes in our culture. My personal and professional experience has shaped the Squires document, which holds that policy is downstream from worldview. Now, if you don't remember who Andrew Breitbart is, he's the founder of Breitbart, but where he got his start with Matt Drudge is they're the ones that uncovered the blue dress, Clinton or Monica Lewinsky's blue dress. There was an article in Newsweek that came out that said that, oh no, all of this is a lie, and the president didn't have anything to do with this. All the while, Andrew Breitbart and Matt Drudge knew exactly where that blue dress was, and they were the ones that exposed it. That's what launched Breitbart, and it's also what launched what was the Drudge Report. The reason I say it is what was the Drudge Report is it got sold, obviously, to some left-leaning individuals, and that thing has taken a sharp turn to the left. Quote, back to the article. The recent tragic deaths of Pavel Lapierre, a 26-year-old tech CEO in Baltimore, and Ryan Carson, a 32-year-old activist in New York City, sparked a debate online about how conservatives should talk about leftists who reap the consequences of their radical policy choices. Both victims were allegedly killed by black suspects. Lapierre said her company was pro-Black Lives Matter and that it stood against a police state that criminalizes black bodies. Carson's girlfriend expressed anti-police sentiments online. The victims of these violent crimes should share the same political perspective as many of the lawmakers in their respective cities. This is where the Squires doctrine comes into play. Morally neutral public policy does not exist. There is no public policy, my friends, that can escape morals and ethics. There's no way that can possibly happen. All laws reflect on someone's beliefs, principles, morals, and values. Now, just think about, and you don't have to be a Christian to understand this, or a Jew to understand this for that matter. Think about the Ten Commandments. Like most laws, definitely most early laws, emanate from the Ten Commandments. Okay, stealing is wrong, murdering is wrong, cheating on your wife, though that's not a law. That's not a crime in our civil procedure. It is in the Code of Military Justice. But most of our laws emanate from those traditional values that originated in the Bible. And if you want to go back further than that, Hammurabi's Code, though we've toned this one down, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So all laws, it doesn't matter what they are predicated on morals, values, and ethics. And those if I could talk, those three things are different. All right, continuing with the article. A separate study, or a 2016 Pew study on religious views and political affiliation, found that 69% of atheists were Democrats. A separate study found that 47% rely on common sense, and common sense is in quotation marks, as a source of moral guidance. People who don't believe in God will always seek out an alternative source of authority. Some trust science, others rely on their own reasoning, and many are easily swayed by public opinion. Now, think about the progressives that you've heard about. They all like to talk about justice. In fact, they've added the word justice to just about everything. Environmental justice, social justice, criminal justice. Of course, we always had that one. But they attach that word justice to everything because for you and I, for every single person, the word justice has really heavy connotations to it. All of us fundamentally understand what that word means in its original context. We know what justice is, and that's why progressives attach that word to everything. Continuing in the article, progressives love to talk about justice, but their definition is completely inverted. True justice is rooted in God's holy and righteous character. It is impartial, consistent, timely, proportional, and corrective. Our purpose of justice is to punish the guilty for the protection of the innocent. That's a pretty easy concept to understand. And frankly, leftists understand it too. But like I mentioned at the beginning of the program, they manipulate words to make you believe things that just aren't true. Just like lying redcoat Ken Chestak. But the article continues. Unfortunately, one of the defining features of modern progressive thought is to sympathize more with the criminals than the victims of crime. As is often the case, race plays a large part. Now, where race comes into this is it comes straight from, and I'm going to call it progressive dogma. Now, progressivism started with the postmoderns, and now I'm referring to philosophy. In postmodern thought, a lot of these guys were Germans, many of them were Nazis, who emigrated from Europe to the United States after the end of World War II. And they started this whole line of thought called postmodernism. And essentially what postmodernism does is it reduces everything to its lowest terms. It deconstructs everything and it purportedly tries to get to the root cause of everything. But the problem is that the root cause of everything, in their view, always boils down to race. That's one of the big reasons why you see a lot of progressives, Democrats, that everything comes down to race. Have you ever noticed that? How often do you hear somebody on TV or on the radio, well, actually not on the radio because Democrat talk radio never works, fortunately for us. But anyway, how often do you hear somebody say, that person is a racist? The reason why they do that is the term racist has negative connotations to it. You can call somebody a racist and you don't have to have any proof whatsoever, and it's on them to prove that they're not. And that all comes down to this postmodern deconstructionist idea of reducing everything to its lowest terms. From the article, unfortunately, one of the defining features of modern progressive thought is to sympathize more with criminals than with the victims of crime. As is often the case, race plays a large part. I saw this firsthand while working in Washington, D.C.'s Gun Violence Prevention Office. More than 90% of homicide victims and perpetrators in D.C. are black. But the city's decision to label potential shooters people of promise, and that's in quotation marks too, would never fly if most of the people killing black people in the nation's capital looked like the January 6th defendants. Race complicates the politics of law and order, but radical ideologies don't exclusively focus on ethnic minorities. One self-professed Christian activist named Shane Claiborne recently shared a letter from a death row inmate shortly before he was executed in Florida. The post on Twitter started this way. Quote, "Tonight, the state of Florida executed Michael Zack. He is the 6th person to be executed in Florida and the 19th to be executed in the United States this year. Please take a minute to read his final words. No one is defending what he did, not even Michael, but we are all more than the worst thing that we've ever done. The death penalty does not heal wounds of violence. It just creates new wounds. It is time to stop killing to try to show that killing is wrong. Claiborne is the co-founder of Red Letter Christians, an LGBTQ affirming organization. First of all, obviously, that last part of the title, LGBTQ affirming organization, it directly contradicts over and over and over what's written in the Bible, but that's a topic for another time. They seem to disregard every part of the Bible but the Gospels. Claiborne failed to mention why Zach, who is white, was executed. Zach brutally murdered 2 children he met at beach bars in June of 1996. Zach's defenders claimed he suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome. A New York legislator who knew Ryan Carson said he would have seen his killer as a victim of structural wrongs. Now, how often have you heard the term structural racism? Probably lots. That means that when you're saying something is structural, that means that it's inherent in the system that you're operating in, that you have to get out of the system to avoid whatever structural problem that you're seeing. And the reason why they say that the United States is a structurally racist place is so that they can tell you that the whole thing is racist and that only their ideas will work. Progressives are uncomfortable with the idea of punishing people they see as victims. But the truth is, retribution in its proper measure serves a vital social function. People who have been wronged often feel a burning desire for revenge, and the natural inclination is to go one step farther than the person who harmed you. Violence tends to escalate if left unchecked. The old saying goes, an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind, but few people stop to consider how much worse the alternative would be, given that a head for an eye would leave everyone dead. When criminal behavior is not addressed swiftly and consistently, chaos and disorder spread. And when that happens, people are going to die. Eventually, it spreads far enough, and citizens get the idea that their government has no interest in protecting their personhood or property. Now, when I get time later this afternoon, I'm going to post this whole article on cowboystatepolitics.com. Because I think that I think that it's really poignant in that the left does try to treat perpetrators as victims, and you can see that throughout our entire society. We don't punish the perpetrator; we punish the victim in a lot of things. We have to let people out of jail because jail, putting people in jail oppresses people. These progressives never stop to think that maybe if you stop the source of the crime will stop. And as it relates to just about everything that I've been talking about during this morning's broadcast, just look at Hamas in Israel. They most definitely are the perpetrators of that horrendous act. I wish I had a word to better describe what they did in Israel, but unfortunately I don't have one. But we have to go after the perpetrators of these acts, and if we don't, the violence and the crimes will continue. That's why we have a justice system. And in the United States, what we're seeing is that we have a 2-tiered justice system. You have perpetrators of crimes like Hunter Biden and our justice system. And in fact, we shouldn't even call it a justice system because that's completely disingenuous. But our legal system is trying to treat him differently because he's a Democrat. And, there's Democrat prosecutors that are trying to let him off the hook. But if it were you or me, and in fact, I know some people that they committed crimes that had a Democrat committed it wouldn't even have been prosecuted. I've done interviews. My pal Joey Carenti is a good example of that. He was prosecuted for a crime that nobody got hurt. Honestly, if it were a Democrat that would have committed the same thing, it wouldn't even have been prosecuted. So we do have a two-tiered legal system in this country. And if you're a Democrat and you're politically connected, you don't have to face the consequences of your actions. Other people who happen to be on the other political side, they absolutely have to face the consequences of what they do. And it's not justice as you and I understand it. And it tends to favor the perpetrator or the victim. So when you look at this whole thing over in Israel, ask yourself an honest question. Who is responsible for that horrendous act of terrorism? Who killed those thousands of people? It wasn't the Israelis, now was it? No, it wasn't. It was Hamas. It was a group that since 1988 and probably before has fired thousands and thousands and thousands of rockets into Israel, a country that is no bigger than the state of Vermont. Actually, it's a little bit smaller than the state of Vermont. So when you're looking at all of these world events, take a step back and just think of, what it is that people are arguing for. I mean, all last night when I was preparing for the show and all this morning, there's all sorts of posts and articles defending the Palestinians. Yesterday, we had a congresswoman taking pictures with the Palestinian flag and the United States flags in the U.S. Capitol, saying there's people in Congress saying that we have to defund Israel. My friends, if we do that, then countries like Iran, groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, they're going to wipe Israel off the face of the map. And after they're done with that, they will come after the United States. And, the liberal progressives, they try to make light of that whole situation as often as they possibly can, simply because they sympathize with those groups. So if you have somebody that's saying, well, that Israel is an apartheid state, first of all, you don't understand what apartheid was. Secondly, you're absolutely lying to people. And third, you are blaming the victim for the wrongs that were committed against them. In this country, we don't punish the victim of crimes, or at least our system is set up not to. In the end, that's not what happens all of the time. It's that two-tiered system I was telling you about. But make sure that you take an objective view of what's going on. I just read you an article that was broken by Fox News of how an ISIS flag was found, with some belongings of a Hamas member. I don't know of a single person. Well, actually, I don't know him personally, but there are people that would defend ISIS. A couple of them are elected to Congress, but any normal person isn't going to defend that sort of behavior, nor should they. And if they do, you absolutely shouldn't listen to them. Well, that was kind of heavy. Let's move on to something that's a little bit more humorous. Now, I never have been a comic book guy, but a lot of people are, and I'm certain that there are members of the Cowboy State Politics audience that do love their comic books. From The Blaze, an article entitled DC Comics Wanted to Permanently Make Batman Black was told sales would drop to a third, insider claims. And I quote, DC Comics wanted to permanently replace the Batman character with a different Black Batman, but was told by retailers that the company should expect a sharp drop in sales, an industry insider reported. The source spoke to Bounding Into Comics under the condition of anonymity and alleged that a contingent of DC Comics made the bold suggestion at the 5G Initiative Summit in 2021. The summit was a forum where the company discusses the future of its fifth generation of characters. This was the same rollout that included a bisexual Superman and a black female Green Lantern. The group's alleged idea was to take Lucius Fox, Bruce Wayne's business manager, and permanently have the ongoing Batman titles feature the new Black Batman as the lead. A portion of the company reportedly thought the character would add an extra layer of diversity to future Batman comic books. Oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion, my friends. That if we don't superficially acknowledge different groups, then somehow they will cease to exist. The truth is that this world is already diverse, and to try to deny realities is to deny the truth of our public discourse. Now, there's all manner of different outfits that are trying to tell you that we have to have diversity, equity, and inclusion. But really what they're doing is forcing that progressive ideology that I just mentioned a little bit ago upon you, that everything boils down to race, and that if we just artificially and superficially substitute one color for another one, that's going to solve some ills of society. But the truth is, most normal people don't look at the world from that through that prism. Take Wyoming, for example. If you walk into any museum in Wyoming, you'll find pictures of white ranches that have black ranch hands on them. You'll find ranches that were owned by black ranchers that have white ranch hands on them. You'll find black ranches that have Mexican ranch hands on them, and on it goes. The truth is that most people in Wyoming, and I think that this is true of the country in general, that most people don't look at the world through the prism of race. All that they care about is that you're a good person and that you do what you do what you say that you're going to do. That's it. Most people have way too much time, way too many things to do than to look at everything through the prism of race, to sit down and say, well, the reason why I'm poor is because I'm black. Now, certainly there are people that do look at the world like that, but they are disregarding and completely ignoring reality. That the real reason why you're in the situation that you're in is you. It doesn't have anything to do with you being black or brown or white or whatever. And if you just substitute a black character for Batman, you're glossing over the reality of what that character was. Most normal people are not superficial, my friends. Most people are thinking, living, breathing humans, and we know that if you just substitute one color for another one, that doesn't erase any sort of reality, or it doesn't change any reality either. Coming up on the program, we're going to talk about free speech and how there's a poll out that says a bunch of Democrats say that you have too much freedom of speech, and we'll do that after the break. We'll finish up the program in just a second, but first, one more absolutely obscene profit timeout. Are you the type of person that thinks it's a good idea to go buy a box of hair color at Walmart, do it yourself, and then when it doesn't turn out quite right, why not just try to do it again? That, my friends, is how you end up with orange hair. Let's be honest, not that many of us know exactly what is going on with that box of hair color. That's why you just shouldn't do it. A better idea is just to call Christine at the Bombshell Studio. She's a certified Redken specialist, and she knows exactly how to get you the exact look that you've been wanting. All the while to keep your hair healthy, which is exactly the opposite of what will happen if you go and try to do it yourself. So give Christine a call. Her phone number is 307-752-4844. That's Christine at the Bombshell Studio. Do you like hot wings? Yeah, me too. In fact, I'm obsessed with them. And the best hot wings in the state of Wyoming are from the Wing It food truck. They travel around the state, going from town to town. All you have to do is go to their Facebook page, the Wing It Food Truck, or go to cowboystatepolitics.com and look underneath the sponsors tab, and you'll find their schedule there. You know, I personally recommend the garlic parmesan wings. They're absolutely amazing, but they've got several other different flavors, not just hot wings or garlic parmesan. You'll find exactly what you've been missing this entire time. So go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, and look underneath the sponsors tab. And that way, you can plan your entire week around where the Wing It food truck is going to be. I get it. Actual summer was really kind of short in Wyoming. And we all know what that means. Fall is here, my friends. And with it comes some pretty unpredictable temperatures. You need to be prepared for all of it. Sometimes we have all 4 seasons in the same week. One of the best ways that you can do that is to get a nice warm hat from New Trend Hats. They have a wide variety of hats for both men and women, and they're sure to keep those ears of yours nice and toasty warm. So go to their website, newtrendhats.com, and make sure you're prepared for whatever is coming. And now, the conclusion to our program. One-third of Democrats say that you have too much freedom to speak freely. Imagine that. My friends, welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics, broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns. proven to be absolutely almost always right 98.82% of the time. I'm your host, David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics Live. Now, if you want to listen to the program in your off time, you can always go to Cowboy State Politics, the podcast, and it's available just about anywhere that you get your podcasts, or you could just listen to the replay that's going to happen later on this afternoon on the Independence Network. Our show lineup for today is, of course, this program, which is over in about 12 minutes. And then you'll have Just Blame Joey, and after that, The Ramble Room with Representative Ken Pendergraft. And then after that, we're going to do a complete replay of the entire day's broadcast. So if you didn't catch it the first time, you can always go back this afternoon and listen to it. The replay begins at 3 o'clock, I believe. Next article. Americans have too much freedom to speak freely. Now, first of all, I'm what you call pretty much a free speech absolutist. I think that there are only, and the reason I say pretty much is there are only a few cases where free speech does not apply. And I mean, first of all, that's inciting violence. So everybody's heard the phrase, read you the riot act. That's specifically what that is referring to. The truth is, you absolutely do have a right to yell fire in a crowded theater, but you're responsible for the results of that action. Remember earlier in the broadcast, I was telling you that all actions have consequences, whether it's where you choose to live or what you choose to do or what you choose to say. But this article from The Blaze, and it's from the 26th of September. I've been saving this one for a while, and I thought today would be a good day to break it out. And I quote, "A recent poll from Real Clear Opinion Research found that 1/3 of registered Democrat respondents feel Americans have too much freedom to speak freely. The poll, released in September, surveyed 1,000 individuals. So, not a huge poll, but still 1,000 people. Of those interviewed, 377 identified as Democrats, 369 as Republicans, and 255 as independent or other. According to the director of the Real Clear survey, Spencer Kimball, the poll revealed that 9 out of 10 respondents support the First Amendment. I should hope so. Quote, "This is agreed upon across the demographics, like party affiliation, age, race," Kimball told Real Clear Politics. But Kimball noted that 42% of individuals under 30 years old, now this is probably the most important part of this poll, under 30 years old stated that it is more important to them that the government is able to place restrictions on speech in the interests of national security. Only 26% of those over 65 agreed. More than 28% of respondents replied that they do not support speech deemed deeply offensive to other people. I've said over and over on my program that when it comes to free speech, really, the only right that you do have is to be offended. If you don't have that right, then you don't have any free speech at all. There's a great book that I encourage everybody to read. It's called How to Argue and Win Every Time by Jerry Spence. And in it, he says that sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Now, everybody has heard that phrase over and over and over as we were growing up. But what does it mean? It means that words cannot hurt you. Now, it's what you do with those words afterwards. Those are actions. Those are not words. And so in the vast majority of instances, what you say is not going to hurt other people. One of the founding principles of this country is called the harms principle. A guy named John Stuart Mill came up with it, and though he was writing after the Constitution was written, he was definitely in line with the thinking of our founders. Now, the harms principle says that the only acceptable use of government force is to prevent harm to another person. But the type of harm that Mill was referring to is actual harm. That is, prevent somebody from beating you up or from stealing your property or, taking the life of one of your loved ones. That's actual harm. The Constitution doesn't have anything, it doesn't say anything about your feelings. In fact, in the vast majority of cases, and the guy that's coming up after me, Joey, one of his favorite phrases is sorry about your feelings or good luck with your feelings. Your feelings are not protected by the Constitution. The only right that you really have is to be offended, because if you don't have that right, you don't have a right to free speech at all. Back to the poll. It found that 34% of Democrat respondents believe Americans have too much freedom to speak freely, while 14.6% of Republicans agreed. Think about that. 14.6% of Republicans agreed that you have too much freedom to speak freely, that there's just some things that you can't say. Now, this is absolutely ridiculous, and it flies in the face of some of the fundamental values we have in the United States. That you have the freedom to speak your mind and express yourself. That was something that the colonists did not have before the Revolution. In fact, there were laws. One of the reasons in the First Amendment that it says you have the right to assemble is there was a law in the colonies that you couldn't have more than 3 people standing on a street corner. And what the British were worried about is that those 3 people would be plotting insurrection or something like that. So there's an absolute reason why the First Amendment is the items in the First Amendment are listed first. They're the most important ones. The right to speak freely, to freely express yourself, the right to freely assemble with the people that you want to hang out with, the right to petition your government for a redress of grievances. Without any of those, you don't have a republic, and you don't have liberty either. Because if people can't speak their mind, I mean, they can't tell you when what you're doing is wrong. They can't voice opposition to somebody else's bad idea. Think about the United States Congress. Most of what they do is talk. Think about all your state legislatures. If you've ever driven down to Cheyenne and visited the Capitol building, those people get paid to talk, to debate issues in a deliberative body. Every sort of fraternal organization or party organization, a main tenet of their organization is speaking. And you have to be able to speak freely, because if you don't, I mean, that's a breeding ground for tyranny, in that you can't, there's just some things that you can't say, that it's going to upset some people. Without the First Amendment, you don't have liberty. And it's absolutely shocking that you have, any group of Americans say that you have too much freedom to speak freely. Now, there are states, I lived in Virginia for a while, and they actually have a law that's called verbal abuse. And literally what would happen, like if you told somebody to, without saying the word, if you told somebody to F off, they could go down to the police station and swear out a warrant against you. The police would come and arrest you, and they would ask questions later. That's a law that regulates what we say to another person, simply because it might hurt their delicate little feelers. And the fact that you have a group of Americans that are saying you have too much freedom is absolutely shocking. Now, the reason I pointed out the demographic is that it's respondents under 30 were the vast majority of the people that answered that poll in that way, the younger generation, because they've been brought up in an atmosphere where your feelings are absolutely important. It doesn't matter if you learn something, just so long as you feel good about it. And that has had disastrous results. Just look at academic achievement in our country. Definitely in Wyoming. If you look at the scores, we're somewhere in the middle, 25th, 26th, or 27th, depending on which measure you look at. But we're right in the middle of academic achievement, because we're too worried about feelings. There are many schools in Wyoming that have done away with grades because receiving a bad grade is going to hurt your feelings. My friends, we have to get away from that and deal with facts, truth, freedom of speech, our Constitution. If you are focused on feelings, then you're not going to be able to solve the real problems that exist in our society, because you're going to be worried about what makes you feel bad. That allows you to lie to yourself and to lie to just about everybody. And it has the end result of people like lying redcoat Ken Chestak. I mean, you have people in our legislatures with, part of their duty is to absolutely lie to you. And so, my friends, the reason why I wanted to end with this story is it is the entire mission of the Independence Network to bring you truth and fact. We're not going to lie to you. In fact, in many cases, we're probably going to hurt your feelings. And, it's not that we set out to do that. It's to bring you the facts, the cold, hard, unvarnished truth, verified with absolute facts. When Joey broke that story about the Wyoming Press Association, initially, they didn't go after the guy who was responsible for it. There was a lot of people that went after Joey. And all he did was bring the facts to light. Well, my friends, that is what we're going to do on the Independence Network. We're going to bring you facts, unvarnished and absolutely down to the detail so that you can believe in it. The Wyoming media and the media at large, they don't do that. They don't bring you the facts. In most cases, they're lying to you. And if they're not outwardly lying to you, they're omitting a lot of different things. On the Independence Network, we're not going to do that. So let me just run down the schedule real quick. Every weekday morning, we're going to have, it'll start out at 8 o'clock with some music, and we'll probably have some other content in there too. It's just this morning, I just played some music so that you could get warmed up and ready for Cowboy State Politics. And then after my show, we'll have a little bit of a break, and then Just Blame Joey at a little bit after 11. And then when he's finished at 1 o'clock, it'll be Ken Pendergraft. So anyway, my friends, thank you for listening. And for now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Northern Command Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.